Good evening, friends. Welcome to AP Daily Live. I'm Jen Rayfields. I'm one of two AP macroeconomics teachers who's going to be working with you over the next 2 weeks with some live review sessions. So let's go ahead and get started with session number one. All right, so let's see what we're going to learn tonight. So I'm going to go over first like the whole set of goals for the review series in its entirety. So we've got these 8 sessions, 4 in week 1, 4 in week 2. And over the course of these 8 videos, what we really want to do is highlight the role of economic thinking skills, because this exam is an opportunity for you to share everything that you've learned over the course of the year. So sometimes I think we put so much emphasis on the exam that we forget that the point of the course is not to prepare you for the exam. The point of the exam is to give you an opportunity to show what you've learned over the course of the year. And a lot of that requires these economic thinking skills that will help you demonstrate your content knowledge. We're also going to spend some time on that content that students tend to find the most challenging. We're going to be putting it all together in a way by examining the big ideas that weave in through multiple units. So rather than here's a unit 1 video and here's a unit 2 video, we're going to take those big topics, the big ideas of the course, and we're going to show you how they spiral throughout multiple units. It's going to allow you to make connections between and among the different topics that you've learned over the course of the whole year. And then finally, you've got it lots and lots of practice. So we'll have some guided practice questions that we do together. Then I'll give you lots of opportunity to pause your video and do practice questions. So these are the goals for the whole series. But up tonight is lesson number 1. And because economic literacy is the whole ball of wax, this lesson is titled Thinking Like an Economist. We're going to be reviewing the language and tools of economic analysis. So here's what's up for tonight. We'll take a big picture look at the AP Macro course. Let's remind ourselves what the whole thing is about. We're going to go through those skills, especially skill 1A, because that's our vocab skill. That's our can you speak the language of economics skill. And then we're going to take a look at some topics from Unit 1 and some topics from Unit 6. So what I like to do is teach my students a very systematic approach to answering questions. So if you go through it the same way each time, you're using those disciplinary thinking skills, you're using that economic reasoning, and that's going to lead you to the correct answer when you do encounter these types of questions. So we're going to do comparative and absolute advantage, mutually beneficial terms of trade. We're going to take a look at those simultaneous change questions, simultaneous changes in demand and supply. And then finally, we're going to go to Unit 6 because we've just got another demand and supply model when we look at our foreign exchange graph. So this is what's on tap for tonight. I am so excited that you're with us. I think it is wonderful that you're watching these videos, that you're committed to your education, you're committed to being successful on this assessment, and we are all rooting for you. All right, so let's warm up with a couple of practice questions. Whenever you see the blue pause button on your screen, we've got a question. You can pause your video, you can answer the question on your own, and then we'll go ahead and do it together. So pause your video and answer this first question. All right, so hopefully you recognize that the fundamental issue economics addresses is the use of scarce resources. All right, let's take a look at another one. All right, do you see it again? The fundamental economic problem is the scarcity of resources. That's why we're all here, right? We are learning how societies deal with the fact that people's needs and wants are unlimited, and the resources we use to produce goods and sources exist in limited quantities. And the whole course is understanding how societies manage that scarcity. And in this course, it's at the macroeconomic level. All right, so let's take a look, as I said, at the big picture. So in Unit 1, we visit those basic economic concepts. We learn to speak the language of economics, and we learn our first couple of models. But in macroeconomics, at the big picture level, we want to remember that for the society as a whole, we have these macroeconomic goals. We want everybody working. We want full employment. We also want price stability. We want to make sure that the inflation rate is moderate in its targeted range. And we want to see stable, steady increases in real output over time. In our next video, economic measurement, we're going to take a look at those measures of economic performance really carefully. But this is what macroeconomics is all about. It's understanding how to measure if we've got these things and what we may be able to do about it if we don't. So in this course, that's the level at which we're working. So like I said, Unit 2, measuring the health of the economy. We're going to really spend time on GDP, the GDP deflator, CPI, unemployment, all those calculations. That's coming up in our next video. Unit 3 is where we learn how to build the model of the macroeconomy. That's our aggregate demand, aggregate supply model. And it's where we learn how different forces affect aggregate demand, aggregate supply, equilibrium levels of output. We also introduce fiscal policy in Unit 3. Then we go into Unit 4, we bring financial markets into the picture. We take a look at the role that they play in the economy. In Unit 5, we examine the long-run implications of the policy tools that we learn how to employ in Units 3 and 4. And then finally, in Unit 6, we bring in the rest of the world. So this is the course, this is the big picture, high-level view of what this course is all about. So again, in order to do these things, though, we have to speak that language. We have to have economic literacy. So that's what we're going to focus on in our video tonight. The economic thinking skills that are described in the course and exam description for both AP Micro and AP Macro are based on this premise, right? Economists use economic concepts, principles, and models to describe, predict, and explain economic behavior and phenomenon. And so each of those words that are highlighted in a different color correlate with the skills that we're learning to develop in the course. And the skills fall into 4 buckets. So skill category 1 is economic principles and models. Can you use the language and tools of economic analysis? I like to introduce skill category 2 and 3 together because in a lot of ways, to be able to understand them, you need to understand both. So skill category 2 is interpretation. Skill category 3 is called manipulation. But what we really want to think about it is as cause and effect relationships. So in skill category 2, what we're doing is we're learning how to say, if something has happened in the economy, can we explain what caused it to happen? So in those kinds of questions, we're given the outcome and we have to determine the cause. In the manipulation skill in skill category 3, it's the reverse. We know that a cause, that something has happened, we have to be able to predict the effects. So these are the three of the skill buckets. And then the 4th skill category is graphing. Right? You've learned a lot of graphing over the course of either the semester or the year. And so skill category 4 is all about answering the question, can you use accurately labeled graphs and models to do each of those first 3 skills? So that's what and so tonight, as we go through these questions and these topics, we're going to highlight specific skills so that you know what they look like, so that when you're reading a question, you can say, what am I being asked? Am I being asked about a definition? Am I being asked what happened? Am I being asked what's going to happen? Am I being asked to use a graph to do it? Okay, so that's what these skills are all about. So those first 2 questions that we had in our warm-up is right from the very first topic of the course, which is scarcity. So the learning objective in that unit, in that topic, is to be able to define scarcity and define and give examples of economic resources. And that's what this question assesses. Okay, this is what skill category 1 looks like, and this is skill 1A. All right, so let's get into our content. Let's review those topics from Unit 1 that students always want to go over as they're preparing for the exam. So the language that we learn in Unit 1 is the language of economics. We learn scarcity, resources, efficiency. Isn't that a huge word in this course, right? When economists say efficiency, that has a very specific and precise meaning. We learn about trade-offs. We learn the definition of opportunity cost. We learn how to consider absolute and comparative advantage, we look at the benefits and gains from trade. We learn how to derive mutually beneficial terms of trade. So in order to do that, we have to know what these words mean. And as I'm sure you've learned, they have very specific, precise, and nuanced meanings. And so the better you understand the language, the more easily you will be able to demonstrate your content knowledge. Then Unit 1 transitions to talking about demand and supply. So the tools that we introduce in Unit 1 are the production possibilities model. So there's one of those. And then we also introduce the supply and demand model, which then, as you know, gets used throughout the course. So as you're setting up your review of Unit 1, this is what you want to focus on, okay? And that's what we're going to be doing in this video. So we're just going to review the PPC. So what is it that you want to know and be able to do when it comes to working with a production possibilities curve model? So you want to be able to read and interpret a PPC. So we've got one up here on the screen. What does it mean to be inside the curve, on the curve, outside the curve? You want to be able to derive opportunity cost information using a PPC. So for example, you might be given specific numbers and asked, what's the opportunity cost of moving from point A to point D on that PPC? You also want to be able to recognize and discuss factors that cause that PPC to shift outwards, right? And we remember now we're looking at two different types of PPCs. We've got one with a linear curve that represents constant opportunity cost, and we have one that's bowed out from the origin. That's how we show increasing opportunity cost. So we want to be able to draw correctly labeled graphs of our PPC model to show the economy in any one of the three output conditions that we learn about: a recessionary gap, an inflationary gap, full employment. We also want to use it to show the effect of a change. Topic 1.3 is absolute and comparative advantage. So I teach my students a very systematic approach to answering the question, no matter what it is. So if you see a question that looks like this, if you've got a PPC curve with two output combinations, if you've got a table that describes the production possibilities for two countries, you can use this same approach no matter how the question shows up. But fundamentally, what we want to be able to do is figure out who's got the absolute advantage, who's got the comparative advantage, and what would be the terms of trade that would benefit both countries. I use a record keeping system that I scratch onto my question, onto my test as I'm taking it, that allows me to answer any variation of that question. And I'm going to show it to you. You certainly don't have to use my system, but you should have some system. So you go through these questions the same way every time, and then you answer the question that you're being asked. So we've got our PPC, we have country 1 and country 2. They, with equivalent resources, they can either produce cars or robots. So you know how to read the PPC. Now let me show you my record keeping system. So I write country 1 and country 2, and I put this little equation. 80 cars equals 100 robots. What that means is country 1, if it uses all its resources, can produce 80 cars. Using its resources, using the equivalent resources, that's what makes it an equation. If country 1 chose to produce only robots, it could produce 100. Then I put up the same equation for country 2's production possibilities. In order to compare the two countries, we have to know what their opportunity cost of one is. And so we have to solve for one car and one robot in terms of the other good. So to do that, we divide both sides by the same number. So in this case, before we do that, let's think about absolute advantage. If it's an output problem, if we're told that we're using equivalent resources, we're looking to see which nation can produce the most output. So when it comes to cars, we see that country 1 has the absolute advantage. And when it comes to robots, we also see that country 1 has the absolute advantage. But as you've learned, just because one country can do more of both doesn't mean they can't benefit from specialization in trade. So now let's determine how they should do that. And that's why we find comparative advantage. So we need to find the opportunity cost for each country of each good. So for country 1, I divided both sides by 80 in order to find the opportunity cost of one car. So for country 1, it's 1.25 robots. And then for country 2, I divide both sides of the equation by 60 to solve for one car for country 2. So for country 2, one car equals a half a robot. Who's got the comparative advantage? it's country 2 because they have the lower opportunity cost. Let's do it for robots. One robot for country 1, now we're dividing both sides by 100. Well, 80 divided by 100 is 8/10 of a car. For country 2, if they want a robot, they have to give up 2 cars. So now we know that country 1 has the comparative advantage in robots. So I draw these I circle who's got the comparative advantage. I draw an arrow that points to it, and that keeps my record of who's got the comparative advantage and what the opportunity costs are. Now that I know the opportunity cost, I can find the mutually beneficial terms of trade by setting the 1 unit of a good between the 2 opportunity costs. So this is what I add to my record keeping. 1 car can trade in a mutually beneficial way as long as the terms of trade are between a half a robot and 1.5 robots. So we know that country 1 has the comparative advantage. So now that we know who's got the comparative advantage, we're ready to determine mutually beneficial terms of trade. So what I do is I set the good that we're examining between the 2 opportunity costs. So let's start with cars. So we know country 2 has the comparative advantage. Country 2 is going to produce cars, and it's going to be willing to trade away a car to country 1 as long as it gets more than it can get on its own, right? If it gives up a car now, it only gets a half a robot. If it gives up a car to country 1, it'll do so if it gets more than a half a robot. Country 1, on the other hand, is going to be willing to accept the car as long as it costs them less than their opportunity cost. So 1 car between 0.5 robots and 1.25 robots. We can do the same thing for robots. 1 robot is going to trade for mutually beneficial terms as long as it's between 0.8 and 2 cars. So that's the record keeping system. I write that down as soon as I see this problem, and then I'm ready to answer any type of question I see. So once I have this system, I can go through the answers and say which one is true and which one is not. And by the time I'm all done, I'm going to know that E is the right answer because that is the answer that's consistent with what I've recorded. All right, so we're going to give you the chance to practice this. But again, if you take a system and you do it the same way every time, you are going to be good to go with these questions. I just want to point out, this is an interpretation question and we're doing calculations. That makes this a skill category 2. And because it's a calculation, it's 2C. All right, so then the second half of the unit is supply and demand, and most students pick this right up. They're consumers, they understand the law of demand. Many of them have had jobs, many of them have been on the supply side of things, and students are really good at using a graph of the supply and demand model to predict how changes in demand or supply will affect the equilibrium price and equilibrium quantity. Those are the things you want to be able to do. You want to recognize those non-price determinants. What are the shifters, right? And you want to use correctly labeled graphs to demonstrate your ability to use them to exercise these economic reasoning skills. Now, I just want to point out that even though we're going to practice using the basic product market model to do this simultaneous supply and demand analysis, you want to be able to do it with all of your market models in this course. That's the loanable funds model, the money market, and the foreign exchange market. The skills that you can develop using the product market model translate beautifully to the other markets that are featured in the course. So if we get a question like this with a simultaneous change in demand and supply, then you want to take the approach of isolating. Let's do one change first, find out what happens to price and quantity, then we'll do the other change, find out what happens to price and quantity, and that's going to allow us to answer this question. So we'll start with the increase in demand, give yourself a little bit of a graph, downward sloping demand, upward sloping supply. We're going to find that equilibrium point, and then we'll shift our demand curve the way that the problem describes. We have an increase in demand. That's going to cause the price to rise. It's going to cause the quantity to rise. And we give ourselves, again, a little bit of a record keeping system. Now we can use a new model and we can show the effect of the increase in supply. So when supply goes up, that makes price go down and quantity go up. So there's our answer. Because quantity is going up in both instances, we can be certain that the quantity in the market will rise. However, because price is moving in opposite directions, we can't be sure where it's going to end up. And so the word we use is indeterminate. So now we know the change in price is indeterminate, quantity is going to increase. There's our answer right there. So this is a skill 3 question. We're given the change and we have to predict the effects. Using a record keeping system is going to allow us to do that very, very smoothly. All right, so now let's connect this supply and demand analysis to Unit 6. This is exchange rates, the foreign exchange market, and the effect of changes in policies on economic conditions on the foreign exchange market. Topic 6.1 is balance of payments. We're going to review that in our next video. That's another economic measurement. And then we'll come back and look at the rest of Unit 6 later on in our review series. I just want to share with you a little bit of a secret. I majored in economics in college. And when I found out that I was teaching economics about 15 years after I graduated, I thought about what were the things that first of all, I loved it. I loved economics. I'm so glad that that was my major. I love teaching economics. I love helping students learn how to speak this language. But I remember that summer before I taught it for the first time, I was nervous about 2 topics. I was nervous about comparative advantage and foreign exchange. And I think it's kind of ironic that that's what's in this video tonight. By the time I was looking at it with an older brain that had been around the block a few times, comparative advantage, I'll be honest, was every bit as hard as I remembered it to be. Foreign exchange, I had a little bit of I wonder why I thought that was so hard. But if you're struggling with these topics, please do not think that you are alone, right? You are learning to speak a language, you are learning to exercise new skills, but it's so valuable that you know this stuff. All right, so let's get into our exchange rates. When we're working with the market for good X, right? Bringing up a regular product market model, we're looking at the price of the good and the quantity of the good. That's what the curves tell us, right? The demand curve is the quantity demanded at every price, and the supply curve is the quantity supplied at every price, and it's the price in dollars. It's the actual price of the good. When we look at a currency market, we want to remember that currency markets show us the relative price of a currency, because when you're buying a currency, you're paying for it with another currency. That vertical axis is supremely important in using a Forex market correctly. So if you can remember that it's a relative price, that will help you. So what I've got here is I made up a currency A. We've got a Forex market for currency A. So to help me remember what I need to do with the model, I make it a supply and demand model with price and quantity. And you've probably learned, and we'll use it later on. There's a fraction that you can create to make your vertical axis label. But if you make a mistake and you put the wrong currency in the numerator, that could be a very costly mistake. And so I encourage you to double check yourself by saying, this is just the price of currency A here on the vertical axis. Then we have the quantity of currency A on the horizontal axis. A trick to doing your fraction correctly is that whatever's on that horizontal axis is what goes in the denominator of that fraction. So we'll look at that a little bit later. So we have the supply of currency A, the demand for currency A, and the equilibrium exchange rate and quantity of A. So this is my system for making sure I know, okay, this is all about currency A. That's what we're looking at in this graph. But when we have a change in the market for currency A in terms of currency B, we can simultaneously use a market graph for currency B to confirm our answer. So here's a Forex market for currency B, and now we're showing the price of currency B in currency A. We've got quantity of currency B on the horizontal axis, supply of currency B, demand, and quantity. So let's show why this works. If we have an increase in demand in the market for good X, what we know is that the increase in demand at the initial price, we've got a shortage. That shortage is going to be eliminated by rising prices. We're going to end up at a new equilibrium point with a higher price and a higher quantity. When the shortcut is when the demand for good X increases, the price of good X rises. Good X gets more expensive. We need more dollars to buy good X. use that same analysis in your currency market. If we have an increase in demand for currency A is going to get more expensive. The price of currency A in currency B is going to rise. When that happens, we say currency A appreciates. It gets more expensive and requires more of currency B to purchase. So if in this case, currency A is appreciating, it's getting more expensive. Currency B is depreciating, it's getting less expensive. In the currency B market, we can show the same thing. In order to buy more currency A, we have to supply more currency B in the foreign exchange market. When the supply goes up, we have a surplus at the original equilibrium exchange rate. That surplus is eliminated with falling prices, and we end up at a new lower price of currency B. So do you see how that second graph confirms the change in the currency values? In both graphs, currency A is appreciating, currency B is depreciating. That's relative price. All right, so now that we know that, we can go ahead and we can continue into Unit 6. One of the things I think is important to recognize is that the models and the graphs that we use, these are all tools to describe changes in economic behavior, right? So we're going to leave currency speculators out of it, and we're just going to say, what is it that's going to cause people to want more of a currency? And the answer is they want to buy more goods or assets denominated in that currency. It's that simple, right? We don't buy currency for the sake of having currency. We buy currency because we want to buy something with that currency. So for example, the desire to purchase goods and services, the desire for Swiss watches will cause foreign purchasers of Swiss watches to demand Swiss francs. They don't want the francs to have francs. They want Swiss watches. Similarly, and as I'm sure you know, the demand for real and financial assets in a country will also drive the demand for that country's currency. And we have an example here too. So then what drives the supply of a currency? It's the desire to buy a foreign currency. We supply our currency into the foreign exchange market when we want to buy another currency. So what do we want to sort of like leave with an understanding of? The reason that we purchase and sell currencies is to facilitate economic transactions between buyers in one nation and sellers in another. It is the changes in the demand for and supply of a currency that result from the underlying economic activity. And if you remember that, it'll help you know which curves am I shifting and which way are they going. Since this is a review video, what I've done here is I've created this graphic organizer that allows you to see the big picture in Unit 6. You can take a screenshot of this. You might want to pause the video and create an empty table for yourself. Put change in international economic activity, change in supply of the domestic currency, right? Use those table headings and then go down the left-hand side and see if you can fill in the table on your own. I'm going to go through just one of these with you, allow you to see how to read this table and see if it helps reinforce what you want to know when it comes to Unit 6. By and large, all of the questions on international trade and foreign exchange come down to, right, one of three things is happening. We have an increase in relative income in one country relative to another. We have an increase in the price level in one country relative to another, or we have an increase in interest rates in one country relative to another. Those are the things that are going to change something in the foreign exchange market and in terms of the demand for and supply of the currency and the exchange rate. Now, the trick is we may not know the cause of the change in relative income, but we have to know that if income rises, people buy more stuff. They buy more domestic goods and services, and they buy more foreign goods and services. So an increase in relative income means that domestic consumers purchase more imports because they have more money to spend. They supply more foreign currency into the exchange market in order to buy the foreign currency, and that causes the foreign currency to appreciate and the domestic currency to depreciate. So the same forces work when we have an increase in the relative price level. Now, if we have an increase in relative interest rates, the reverse happens. If the interest rates in a domestic economy rise relative to interest rates in other countries, then domestic savers are going to want to buy fewer financial assets in foreign countries. They are at the margins going to supply less currency into the foreign exchange rate, and there's going to be a decrease in demand for the foreign currency. And that's going to cause the domestic currency to appreciate and the foreign currency to depreciate. So these are the three things that are going to lead to changes in the demand for and supply of a currency. Okay, these are increases. Now I'm going to go to the next slide. It's going to show you decreases. See if you can work through that table. Notice I put on the side here, this is that cause and effect stuff. We might be looking at the middle column and being asked to predict what happened in the first column. We might be given a change in the first column and asked to predict what happens in the second and third and fourth and fifth columns. So understanding, am I being asked what did happen, or am I being asked what's going to happen? That is going to help you work with foreign exchange markets too. So here's our slide. It's got our review of what happens if there's a decrease in relative income, relative price level, relative interest rates. I'll let you pause the video, walk yourself through it, or take a screenshot and use this. If you need a review of Unit 6, don't forget that the AP Classroom videos go through each of the topics really systematically and thoroughly. And you can certainly go back to AP Classroom and watch those videos if you want more foreign exchange stuff. All right, so now we're going to practice. We're going to bring up both multiple choice and free response questions on all of these topics. We're going to start with that blue pause button. So pause your video when you see it, and then we'll go through and show the answer. All right, so what are we being asked here? We're being asked about what it means to be inside the PPC, and I'm sure you know that that means we are not using our resources as efficiently and productively as we can, or some of our resources are unemployed. Let's look at the next one. Okay, I highlighted in blue those important words to help you know what this question is asking you about. It is obviously the slope of the production possibilities curve. And if we have increasing opportunity costs, then that curve is bowed outward from the origin. Very good. Let's look at some more. Okay, use a systematic approach here. It says the current PPC is PPC1, so that's where we're starting. It says which of the following changes indicates a recession. So we're going from a point on that PPC1 to a point inside that PPC1. And so C is the only answer that reflects that kind of movement. C is the correct one. Here we go. Here is one of those absolute comparative advantage gains from trade problems. So I want you to pause your video. I want you to use a record keeping system, go through systematically and answer the question. All right, let's see how you did. So here's my record keeping system. We know what the opportunity costs are. We know who's got the comparative advantage, and we know those beneficial terms of trade. So which answer satisfies all of the information in our record keeping? Answer choice B. If you answer the question first and then find the answer in the answer choices, you're going to have an easier time of it. Now we've got one of those simultaneous changes. Can you do it? I know you can. I bet you gave yourself two graphs and then do the increase in supply in the first graph. When the supply goes up, price goes down, quantity goes up. When we have an increase in demand, price goes up, quantity goes up. So we can use our record keeping system. We can see that the change in price is indeterminate and the change in quantity is going to be an increase. So can we find that in our answer choices? There it is. All right, again, we're given the cause, have to predict the effects. Here's a topic 6.2 multiple choice question. Do you recognize the definition of the term exchange rate? That's what you were being asked about. There's one of those skill 1 questions. Okay, here's a question that's got a graph in it. And you're being told that the current price of euros in dollars is $1.50. How did you do with this one? Did you draw a line across your graph and see what happens if the price is $1.50? So when the price is $1.50, which as you can see is above the equilibrium exchange rate, the quantity demanded is less than the quantity supplied. What does that mean? It means we have a surplus. How do markets deal with surpluses? The price is going to fall. So the market condition is a surplus. If the price goes down, the currency depreciates. So I want to draw your attention to that vertical axis. Here's another way of correctly labeling the vertical axis. It's dollars per euro. So how many dollars do we need to buy each euro? In other words, what is the price of euros in dollars? What's the dollar price of a euro? Okay. All right. Here is an FRQ. So pause your video, use your record keeping system, find the information you need, and then answer the questions. How did you do? Did you bring up your, okay, so did you do this? Did you find out what's the opportunity cost of one furnace in each country? What's the opportunity cost of one solar panel in each country? Who's got the comparative advantage in each good? Who's got the absolute advantage? And what are the mutually beneficial terms of trade? Once you've got that record keeping set up, we are ready to answer these questions. If it doesn't say explain, we are just making an assertion. Country-wide is the absolute advantage in producing solar panels. We can calculate our opportunity cost by showing that the opportunity cost of one furnace is equal to 12 solar panels divided by 6. We already know who's got the comparative advantage in each good, so we can just use our record keeping system to answer this question. Since this is an explain point, we have to prove our answer is true. In order to produce one furnace, country X has to give up 1 1/3 solar panels, but country Y has to give up 2. Since country X's opportunity cost is lower, that's the nation that has the comparative advantage. And then finally, we have our terms of trade question. It's not an explain point, so you just have to make an assertion. In this case, the correct answer is country X should produce solar panels domestically. If you had to explain, this is the explanation you would want to give. All right, so take a minute to read it. And basically the answer is, since country X is better off producing it by itself, since the terms of trade are outside its opportunity cost, country X is better off producing domestically. All right, let's go on. Here's a very typical PPC question. I just pulled one prong of the question because I want to show you how these graphing skills work. So we're told that the country of rank and land is in a recession. We always find important information in the beginning of the question. Now we have to draw a correctly labeled production possibilities curve for rank and land, and we have to show a point that could represent the current output combination and label it A. So the first part of skill category 4 is, can you just draw a correctly labeled graph? So I have an acronym that I use all over the place. You want to ace your graphs, right? Correctly labeled axes, correctly labeled curves, correctly labeled equilibrium or points of interest. All right, so in this case, our correctly labeled axes are food and clothing, and our curve is the rank and land PPC. We aren't told anything about opportunity cost, so we could draw a straight line or constant opportunity cost PPC. But in this case, we've got one with increasing opportunity costs. The middle skill in category 4 is to demonstrate your understanding of a specific economic situation. So once you've drawn your correctly labeled graph, then you use it to show the situation you're being asked about. So we're being asked to show a recessionary gap. We put a point inside our curve, we label it A. That's the first point on this FRQ. Now here's a longer FRQ. This is a more complete FRQ. It's not just consumer goods and capital goods. So pause your video, see how you do. All right, is this what you got in your answer? For part A, we drew a correctly labeled graph, correctly labeled axes, correctly labeled curves. We're demonstrating our understanding of the situation by putting a point X on the PPC. All right, that's our first point. Then in part B, we have to use a correctly labeled graph of the loanable funds market. So again, axes, curves, equilibrium point. Find your starting place. We're going to go over each of these graphs, the axes labels, the curves labels. We're going to do that in one of our upcoming sessions. So we're not going to focus on that now, but hopefully you recognize that the supply of loanable funds is savings. So if we have an increase in national savings, the supply of loanable funds is going to go up. Now we have to show the effect of a change. And that's the last category in skill. That's the last skill in skill category 4. Show the effect of a change. That means we must have notations and directional arrows to indicate which is the first position and which is the new position. So you can make a notation that we've got R1, the supply of loanable funds 1, and the quantity of loanable funds 1. We use those directional arrows to show the effect of a change. Okay, so that would be correctly labeled graph to answer point B. And then for part C, we have to go back to that graph that we produced in part A and show the effect of the change in the real interest rate on the nation's production possibilities curve. So if the real interest rate falls, we know that that makes investment spending cheaper. Firms use borrowed money to produce capital goods, to purchase capital goods, to increase their productive capacity. So if the real interest rate falls, we are going to have a movement along our current PPC curve. We're going to go from point X to point Z, indicating producing fewer consumer goods, producing more capital goods. Some kids probably wanted to shift out the curve to indicate, because they know real interest rate falls, private domestic investment spending goes up, more capital stock gets added to the economy, increases the economic growth rate. That's a shift out of the PPC. That's not wrong, but it is today's increase in capital spending that causes tomorrow's economic growth. So the first part of this change is we're going from the current combination of consumer goods and capital goods to a new combination of consumer goods and capital goods. And later, our PPC is going to shift out. Here's a 4X question. So go ahead and pause your video. How did you do? All right, so hopefully you feel really confident using these 4X graphs now. Like I said, I'm going to bring up that fraction that we can use in our vertical axis label. Price of yen in euros is absolutely just as correct, much less likely to make a mistake. If you have yen in the numerator and euro in the denominator, you're going to lose both points on this question. It is a costly mistake to make. The reason why is because we have to have a correctly labeled graph and we have to show the effect on the exchange rate. So if we don't get the exchange rate right, we don't have a correctly labeled graph and we aren't showing the correct change. So we know it's the quantity of yen, price of yen, supply of yen, demand for yen. We're going to have an increase in the demand for yen. That's going to cause that equilibrium exchange rate to rise. Then we have to explain what's going to happen to Japan's net exports and Japan's balance of payments. So I bet you had no problem with the net exports questions. Net exports is going to increase when the yen gets more expensive. The things denominated yen cost more domestic currency. Foreign purchasers are going to buy fewer Japanese exports. Simultaneously, a stronger yen means increased purchasing power in other countries. That's going to cause imports to Japan to increase. So if exports go down and imports go up, net exports decrease. Now, this balance of payments one is tricky because I bet you went right to the current account and you know that exports is a credit and imports is a debit. So you probably rushed to say, the balance of payments is going to move towards a deficit. And I will be totally honest, I did that too, because I did not read the question carefully enough. We are not being asked about the current account balance. We're being asked about the balance of payments accounts balance. So remember, you're absolutely right. Current account is going to move to a deficit, but every change in the current account has to be offset by a change in the current capital and financial account. So if the current account's moving towards a deficit, the capital and financial account is moving towards a surplus, and we end up current account plus capital and financial account, the balance is zero. That's not changing. So the answer to B2 is no change. If you got that one wrong, don't feel bad. Learn a lesson from it. Read carefully. I know you're in a rush. I know you're under the gun time-wise. I know you care about doing a good job on this, but every second you spend reading carefully is gonna really benefit you. Okay, let's see what part C looks like. All right, well, if we want the currency to value to decrease, we've got two choices. Is the Central Bank of Japan gonna buy or sell yen? If they want the price of yen to go down, they're going to increase the supply. So they're going to sell yen. That's the answer to part C. All right. How did you do? How do you feel? Hopefully you feel more confident. Hopefully you recognize you know this. You've got a lot of this down. There might be some things that you need to brush up on, but you did a really good job tonight. I'm proud of you. So what do we want to walk away from this video sort of keeping in mind as we continue our review heading into the AP Econ exam, the macro exam? So the final thoughts are these. The language of economics is precise and nuanced. Economists mean very specific things that when they use words that we're used to using in very common parlance. So the better you know that language, the more economic literacy you have, the stronger you'll do when it's time to demonstrate what you know. So strong understanding of the terms enhances your ability to show that you know this stuff, both in multiple choice and in free response questions. Finally, I think it's worth thinking about those skills. You don't have to worry, is it a 4A or a 4B or a 4C? But think about, am I being asked for a definition? Am I being asked to explain what happened? Am I being asked to predict the effects of something? Or am I being able to use very carefully, systematically, and accurately drawn graphs to describe economic behavior? So the better you understand what you're being asked, the better you'll be able to answer it. Use a systematic approach to solve those complex multi-step questions. Do it the same way every time, and you'll go in being confident, knowing you're going to get the right answer. You have got this. So I want to thank you so much for joining me. This was just the first of 8 videos. Tomorrow I will be back. I'm going to talk about economic measurement, and the subtitle for that is, what's the formula for that? We're going to go through all those AP macro formulas, all of that economic measurement. I am so excited. I will see you tomorrow night. Thank you so much for watching.